Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is the idiotic delays by the Scottish National Party in accepting the findings of the CASS report, despite promises to deal with it before the summer recess, to either accept the findings or ignore them, or do something in the middle. And they'll now do nothing until after the summer recess. Now, the Daily Express have picked up on this, and I'll use their report and I'll make my own comments on it after telling you their report on it. So their headline is, the SNP are refusing to give an update on gender services for children and young people. The shilly-shallying and foot shuffling over the CASS review by NAP ministers is leaving young people exposed to dangerous medical interventions and abuse by opportunistic predators. The SNP have refused to bring an update on gender services for children and young people before recess, although they promised it would do so back in May the 8th. They've blamed the election campaign for the delay, but that won't wash, since this was announced well before it was called and the issue is a devolved one. Now that's a good point, because the Scottish Parliament doesn't stop when Westminster stops because of the election. The election has actually been barred from being spoken about in Holyrood. So this should affect Holyrood in no way whatsoever. The only way it will affect Holyrood is if those employed to work on you and I's behalf in Holyrood are out election campaigning for people other than themselves, because they're not up for election. So this is an idiotic excuse that is unacceptable, because the election going on for Westminster politicians should have zero effect whatsoever on the running of Holyrood. And if it is, then we have a problem. So it's bollocks. However, yet the minister has given no explanation to opposition parties, or more importantly, the young people and their families who deserve help with issues of gender distress. It's typical of the shilly-shallying and foot shuffling that has greeted the CASS review. This substantial report was rooted in scientific evidence and made urgent recommendations over controversial treatments which had, until then, received little scrutiny. But the SNP dragged their heels about making a statement on whether the use of puberty blockers would be halted, as it was in England. Scottish Labour, which backed the SNP's disastrous self-ID plans, has actually altered the wording of the UK Labour manifesto, doubling down on the issue that most people recognise can't be reduced to glib slogans. Young people uncertain about their gender roles or sexuality deserve better support and protection, and so do women and girls. Poorly thought out measures, even if well-meaning, that don't have all their interests at heart are exactly what leads to dangerous medical interventions and abuse by opportunistic predators. So, bit of a sham. What I think is going on here is the exact same as what's going on with the oil thing, where the SNP are not quite sure what they want to do, because whatever side they fall on, the oil thing will damage them. Because if they agree, right now they've got this thing that was decided by Nicola Sturgeon that they wouldn't support any new licences being issued, although they're actually issued with Westminster. But that's their party stance on it. Now, that sits nice with the Greens, but it doesn't sit nice for folk like Stephen Flynn, who sit now in an election up in Aberdeen, an area heavily reliant on oil money. So, if they say, no, we're standing by it, folk like Stephen Flynn are sort of snookered, because they're out trying to win votes. And if they say, yeah, we should open up oil licences, then the Greens will simply fall out with them. And I'll remind you that the Greens need to support them, or they need to find support from anywhere when it comes to budgets getting passed under Parliament. And they're a minority government now. And if they don't get a budget accepted, we go to an automatic election for Holyrood. So then that's one of the most important things they need to consider when they're in a minority government. You can imagine how reliant they are on the Greens voting their budget through. And if they were to open up to the notion of new licences but issued in North Sea oil, the Greens would fall out of them. I see this gender thing as the exact same, because the Greens, who their main reason for existing is to help climate change, etc., and environmental issues, have now become a party that talk more about independence and gender recognition issues, which is bizarre. Actually, I've shared many videos on they've released during this election campaign. I've shared many on Twitter where they actually don't talk about environmental issues at all. They talk about, even one was all about abolishing the monarchy. So they're a Republican nationalist organisation and not so much of an environmental group. So you can imagine if they make a decision to totally accept the CASS report, how that would affect the relationship they have with the Greens. Now, Patrick Harvey, the day that the CASS report came out, was already very critical and saying that he couldn't accept it right now because of the amount of pushback against the CASS report. Now, this was hours after the report came out, and only pushback anybody could see publicly was from trans activists, not from medical professionals. So when he made that comment, the only pushback there was from people waving the bastardised version of the rainbow flag and saying that this wasn't fair, and they wanted kids to have treatments that would change their lives forever, where normal ground would paused all that until we find a better understanding of the CASS report. So that's where we are with the Greens. They say that the CASS report's non-scientific. They don't want to believe the science in the CASS report, yet they want us to believe the science all the time when they talk about environment, which is rather bizarre. So I see the gender recognition thing in the CASS report being such a hot potato for the SNP the exact same way as environmental issues are a hot potato for the SNP. They can do no right. It doesn't matter what side they fall on, because if they continue to support these gender things, then a vast chunk of the population who don't understand why politicians cannot describe what a woman is, then they might lose votes. But the spin is, if they go against the trans movement, then the Greens will fall out with them and won't back them when they get to budget time. So what we have now is, we've got a government, a minority government, that cannot make decisions that they believe are the best for the people of Scotland. They're making decisions based on what they think is best for keeping them in government for at least another 2 years, because if we don't see an early election, the next Scottish elections are 2026. And now that they're in a minority government, they need to find support, so they will pander to anybody. And it's a ridiculous notion. So I wish they would just do the right thing and actually just call for an election. But they won't, because they know that they get battered. So they won't do that. And their party rely heavily on the money they get from their MSPs, who all pay into the ministerial levy. So they've got, 60 people? All right? Yeah, about 60 odd MSPs who all pay a portion of their wages into their kitty in a ministerial levy. So if they have an election tomorrow and they have the amount of seats, they have the amount of money in their skin. So they're now doing stuff not for the betterment of our country, but purely to keep them in a position for as long as possible so they can keep their party afloat with their ministerial levies. So now what we've got is, we've got these kids and their families that I've spoken to some of them. I've done a podcast recently with a couple who had 2 transgender children, and their life's pretty tough. And it's getting made even tougher because these idiots can't make decisions, breaking promises, not to me, not to everyone in Scotland, which they have, but that's not the important thing. They broke promises to these people who require services and help, because they promised on the 8th of May that they would have this done and dusted before the summer recess, and now they're saying they can't because there's an election, which should have no bearing whatsoever in the operational facility within Scottish Government. So they're talking nonsense, absolute lies again, just to keep them in their seats of power for a little bit longer. And I ain't falling for it. These are crass, You're dangerous. You're selfish. You're abysmal. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notifications, and YouTube will let you know anytime I put a video out. But the most important thing of all, unless you're the SNP, the folk in the Greens that don't know what a woman is, or anybody else that follows this cult, everybody else, have a great day. Cheery bye now.